Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, where today, this is going to be a fun video. We're going to be going through my entire eyeshadow palette collection. Everything that I currently own, I'm going to be talking about and showing you guys, giving you a little bit of a tour. If you are new here, hello, my name is Rachel. I'm a homeschooling stay-at-home mom. I love to play with colorful eyeshadow. I did film this look, and I'll link it down below in the description box in case you want to see it. I upload several videos every week. It's all eyeshadow related content, so if you like what you see and you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe before you go. Now let's get rolling. I will put in a little disclaimer here. Some of these palettes either are for sale or are going to be for sale when I do a bit of a declutter. I try to keep my collection more curated. I don't want to have tons and tons of palettes because I was raised very frugally and I don't like the idea of waste. So if there's a palette in my collection that is just not being used, I would rather sell it to somebody who is going to use it and enjoy it rather than it collect dust and slowly expire in my cabinet. So I try to regularly go through my collection and do a bit of a declutter, like I haven't used this palette in ages, or I have another palette with a similar color story which I prefer, or I don't like this formula anymore, whatever it may be. And those are palettes that I will then list on either Poshmark or MERCARI. My information for that is also linked down below in the description box. So that's where I am, and I thought it would be fun to just go through the palettes today. So I'm gonna make this a little bit shorter than last year's video, I hope, because in last year's, or what was it, maybe my mid-year collection tour, I forget. It's probably a mid-year collection tour. I talked a little bit more about each palette as I went through it, and I don't feel that that's necessary right now because whenever I use a palette or do some sort of themed video or ranking or anything like that, I talk about the palettes and their merits. So I'm not going to go through all of those details today. This is going to be a little bit more of a, here's what I have, let's look at eyeshadow palettes. There is no particular order. These were kind of pulled out of my cabinet and just stacked. So I'm probably going to have a bit of a smattering of brands all over the place. And I will do my best to link these palettes below in the description box in case you want to buy one of these. If it's available, I'll link it below. Now let's get rolling. First, I'm going to start with the smallest palette in my collection, which is a custom palette from MAC Cosmetics. This was a gift. Oh my goodness, they're all falling off my lap. This was a gift from my sister for my birthday. She customized this palette, chose the shadows herself, and it's just a lovely little quad. I love the more autumnal sort of colors in this palette, and I have to say, I had never tried MAC before. I was really impressed with their mattes. So I'm excited to pair the mattes in here with some really exciting shimmers and see if I can get really lovely looks, or just use these four, these four shadows right here. There's nothing bad or wrong with them. They're just a little bit less exciting, a bit more sophisticated and classy. So when I want to go for something that's not quite as, you can see me from space as this sort of eye look, this is a great match for that. The next smallest palette in my collection is the Queen Bee palette from Colored Rain. This is quite new to my collection, and I think this palette is incredible. Absolutely amazing. It surprises me that I have something so small and have such a high opinion of it. The mattes are amazing. The shimmers are beautiful, just stunning shimmers. This is like the shimmer quality that you're getting from the brands who are really specializing in great, exciting and impactful shimmers. That's what you get in this palette. There's a beautiful lemony sort of yellow, an incredible deep black matte, some lovely harvest sorts of tones. It's just really good. Sorry about that. Hopefully my voice doesn't die out halfway through this video. It did get tired the last time I filmed one of these. We're going to jump right into the Colourpop 9 pans because they happen to be on top of my pile. Here is the Blue Moon palette. This is a good palette. I like it a lot. It's been a staple in my collection for quite a while. It may be getting replaced by something soon, but I'm not going to tell you what that is. But I do have a palette or two actually on their way to me, which may end up replacing this as far as simply offering a little bit more shades that are aligned with my tastes and my preferences at this point, what I've developed into, or what my style has developed into. It is a really good palette though, it's very good quality. Now we've got the High Tide palette from Colourpop. This is one in their cardboard packaging, which I really like. I really like their cardboard packaging. High Tide is a great teal monochromatic palette. It has some minty tones. It has some darker tones. You can get a pretty varied look with this, considering the fact that it's monochromatic. And I like it. It's really good quality. It has survived several declutters. The All Amethyst palette from Colourpop. You guys know I have mixed feelings about this guy. I love the packaging, I love the color story, I love the cool toned purples, but not too on the nose. It's not too obvious. I think it's very unique and interesting. However, these three mattes are, in my opinion, duds. They're just not very good, but the rest of the shimmers and the mattes are very pretty. So I go back and forth as to whether I want to keep this or declutter it. If something came along which replaced the very beautiful shimmers in these two mattes, then I would definitely pass it along, just because it's not terrible quality, but I want to enjoy every shade in a palette, and to have a third of the palette be something that just doesn't excite me or even impress me at all, it's a little bit disappointing. And here we have in the Limelight, also from Colourpop. This is their, I won't say monochromatic lime green palette because it does have these two shades here and this one also, but it's mainly limes. And it's a good palette. It's got some nice tones and it's good quality as well. It doesn't have a lot of depth, obviously, because it's limes, but I do like that they brought in a pink and that they brought in more of a brown tone. I've considered decluttering this one. I had a subscriber mention that they really wanted it. So I'm thinking, you know, if people are really wanting this palette and apparently it's discontinued, then maybe I'll pop it on Poshmark or Mercari just because I'm not getting that much use out of it. And I want to see my palettes being used. So if they're in my collection and they're sitting around going bad, I would rather pass them on to somebody else so that I know they're being used. I mean, that's the whole point. We don't buy eyeshadow just to look at them sit in our cabinet. That's a waste. Here we have the Aha Honey palette from Colourpop in their plastic packaging. This is part of their monochromatic series, and this is one that has a pressed glitter, which I'm not a huge fan of. This is a fun yellow palette. The shade here, Sweet Spot, is a very good yellow matte. I might keep the palette just for that matte. However, I do have good yellows elsewhere, so this one might get decluttered. This is not an official declutter video. It's helpful for me to go through my collection periodically and say, you know what? That one's just taking up space because I can get those shades elsewhere in my collection. I don't want to take up space. I don't want clutter in my home. So this one is in the maybe pile in the back of my mind. Here we've got the Child palette between Colourpop and Star Wars. This was the first launch of their Star Wars collaborations. They had the Child, then they launched Darth Vader, I think, or Mandalorian, and then Darth Vader. I'm not sure which order. Then they launched the large Star Wars palette, and then they recently launched the C-3PO palette. Here's the Child. I still think that this is the best out of all of them, although I haven't tried the others. I mean, color story wise, this is the one that appeals to me the most. This is a beautiful palette. I did have this shadow break on me. It's not the end of the world. It's just slightly annoying. I really like this palette because you can go cooler toned or you can go warm toned, and there are shimmers and mattes that work with either of those options. It's very versatile considering it's only 9 pans. The packaging is a winner. It's beautiful olivey toned greens, and you can get some depth and some lightness, inner corner highlight. It's a good palette. We've got the Mint to Be palette from Colourpop, again, part of their original 9-pan monochromatic line. This one had 2 shades break on me because Super Shocks hate me and they want to fall out of my palettes. This one is totally gone, and this one wasn't even a Super Shock, was it? I don't remember. Oh, you hear the baby. Die. Let me see if I can turn that monitor down. Okay, I have no idea what I was saying. I turned down the baby monitor because she was squealing with delight, and then I had to help my other daughter with school. Anyway, I know that we were on this palette. This shade broke, but it's a great palette. I really like the shimmers in here. They're really very pretty, and this shade here is especially lovely. It's just a fun palette. I enjoy pairing mint with other colors. I think that's it for the Colourpop 9 pans. Now we're going to move into some BH Cosmetics. This is the Mimosa palette. This is, again, is a very nice palette. This is part of their brunch series. Lots of pinks, as you can see. A decent variety, some interesting shimmers, a couple pops of color. I like having a matte white because you can blend it out with any other shade and turn that shade into a pastel version of itself. I think that this palette really needs to go deeper. I think a couple of deep reds would have brought in a lot more value. But it is a good palette, and I do enjoy using it. Again, it's fun to pair with other things. It's fun to pair with reds and see what kinds of really berry tone looks you can create. Here is the Passion in Paris palette. This was from their travel series. I love the depth that this brings. This is a dark black, a dark, really dark green with a hint of blue in it. This is a dark blue, dark red, and then we have some interesting shimmers. I love the Louvre shade up here because it's a fantastic inner corner highlight. I often dip into this palette just for that shade. It's got a couple neutral tones you can use to blend out. It's got some blue tones, some purpley sorts of tones, some red. It's got a cream. Overall, it's a good palette. It's well balanced. I think it's well curated. And then here is the Summer and Saint-Tropez palette. I don't know if I'm saying that right. This one is new to my collection because a subscriber gifted it to me. I haven't actually played with it yet, but I think the color story is really pretty. It reminds me of the Colourpop Cabana Club palette, which I've considered buying several times, and that's why I've kept this one because, well, hey, if I can get similar shades in a good formula, and I know that BH had a good formula at this point. I don't know if this is their absolute best formula because this is the first release of their travel series before they upgraded the formula and changed the packaging. But I don't know. I haven't tried it yet, but I do look forward to trying it because I think it could bring me some really nice neutral sorts of tones with a mauve twist or a blue or red or berry or pink twist. some orange, we got a couple neutrals here, some interesting shimmers, and one of my subscribers has told me that these two shimmers are actually more like duochromes, and they are really very pretty. So I'm excited to play in this palette. I like this deep blue over here. It's kind of like a silver gray blue. This color right here makes me think of the ABH Riviera palette. I'm not sure what it is. I think it's just that kind of nautical blue. I think it's pretty, and it's a good complement to some of the other tones. So I think this palette, again, is well laid out. Haven't played with it yet, but I do look forward to playing with it. This is going to be such a mess when I'm done. I'm just going to have palettes everywhere. I'm sitting on a stool in front of my couch, and my baby belly is starting to get in the way when I reach down to get things. I'm a mess. Okay, moving on. Limoncello from Colourpop. I bought this palette, I admit it. I bought it mostly for the packaging. I adore this packaging. It is so pretty. I lived in Italy. I love the theme and the tile work and the colors and the name and the presentation. It's just beautiful. However, within the packaging, there's also a lot of very, very pretty shadows. This is kind of my go-to neutral palette because it's got cooler tones. It's also got warmer tones, and it also has these interesting pops, so you can bring in some blue or green or yellow. I think this is a very well-balanced palette. It's sturdy. It feels like good quality. It's got a mirror. It's really nice. I have a few other neutral palettes in my collection right now, and I think I might just pass those along and keep this one because I don't go for neutrals that often. And when I do, the Limoncello palette, which is one that I'd like to keep simply because of what it is, what it represents, and the happy memories I have with it and the happy memories of Italy that it brings back to me, this palette does offer me pretty much any neutral tones that I would want, including an inner corner highlight and some other more mid-toned neutral shimmers. So it's great. Here's the Through My Eyes palette. This was a collaboration between Colourpop and I Love Sarahi. I think this palette is also very pretty, quite interesting. It's rather a unique color story, I think, with the bronzy, teal, pinky kinds of shades. I like the pop of yellow. It's got some inner corner highlights. It's got a few neutral shades you can use to blend things out. It's a very pretty palette, and it's interesting, and I do enjoy playing with it. Moving right along to one of my favorite Colourpop palettes, At Forest Sight, between Colourpop and Raw Beauty Kristi. This is a classic. This is one of their best palettes in my opinion. It's one of their best collaborations in my opinion. I think it's so beautiful. I love the color story. I love that it's more matte heavy because I prefer to be able to create the depth and dimension and roundness of tone with mattes and then put on a shimmer for that last final accent. But an all matte look to me is more interesting than an all shimmer look, so I prefer my palettes to be a little more on the matte side. This one has two shimmers, and not only does both shimmer work with every shade in the palette, but the shimmers are quite different. And so you could go two totally different directions with a cooler green brown based shimmer or a warm tone gold shimmer. So pretty, so pretty. I recently did a video, which I can card above for you, which was a palette bingo between every collaboration palette I have when they collaborated with a person as opposed to a franchise. And this gold shimmer was a feature in that last video. It was so pretty. I also love the packaging, love the watercolor details in the At Forest Sight palette. Here's the Lush Life palette from Colourpop. This is a palette that has good memories for me because I think it's one of the first times I've really grabbed a palette for colors. Like, I was starting to figure out that I really liked colorful eyeshadow, and this palette just spoke to me as far as all of the colors it offers, plus it's great quality. I think it's a very interesting palette. I have considered decluttering this one now and then if I felt that it was replaced, but nothing's quite replaced it because this color story is quite unique. You know, yes, we've got blues and greens everywhere. They're in all the palettes. But this row right here and then this row are both kind of special, and I think that the palette overall is just a home run. I just found a couple more Colourpop 9-pan palettes because I had been interrupted in the middle of that little part of the video. So let me jump into those quickly. Here's the Orchid You Not palette. This is rather new to my collection and it is very good quality. I love the grapey berry tones of it. I prefer this one to Wine and Only because I do prefer these more royal purple tones over the berry wine tones just on myself. But the quality is excellent, and I like this one because it has a lighter shimmer as opposed to being completely dark. It's really very pretty. If you've had your eye on this palette, I can recommend it for sure. Now we've got Sprinkle a Little Magic between Colourpop and Tinkerbell. This one, again, I had a shade break on me and a shade that is going to break on me. It's very sad. I don't know why. My Super Shocks just don't like me. They're so pretty, and then they shatter and land on my carpet, and then they get stepped in and trod into the fibers, and I have to vacuum, and I just get annoyed. It's annoying. Anyway, this is a great palette. fantastic quality. I recently used this shade before it broke, and then it shattered, so I was glad I got to use I got to use it. I like the depth and range in here. We've got some light tones and some deep tones and some mid-tone shades as well. It's really lovely. It's a very nice palette. It's also really good quality, and the packaging feels sturdy and secure. Nice mirror. It's nice. Now we have Lilac You a Lot from Colourpop, original monochromatic series. This is their lilac palette, obviously some lighter purples, but not all light purples. We've got a couple deep tones in here. There's a good variety of mattes and some interesting shimmers as well. It's quite pretty. The last time I used this palette, I was not very excited anymore by the shimmers, and I don't know if that's a matter of palette aging or Colourpop's quality improving, or simply me being exposed to more brands that have more exciting shimmers. And so this palette is actually listed for sale because it's really good, but it doesn't excite me anymore. And at this point, I do have other palettes within my collection that give me the lovely light tone purples that I want. Here we have the Wine and Only palette. This one's also listed for sale for the reasons that I mentioned when I talked about the Or Kid You Not. I prefer the cooler, grapey purple tones, the true purples, over the wine burgundy tones on my own skin with my own coloring. This is a very pretty palette though. I do wish that it went a little bit lighter. This is the lightest shimmer and this is the lightest matte. And to my opinion, they're both pretty well mid-tone shade like depths. I just wish I had a little more variety because I feel like it's kind of a one-note wonder. And I think this is the last of the monochromatics from Colourpop, or even just the 9 pans from Colourpop. Here's It's My Pleasure. This one is a good purple palette. It's very pretty. It has some nice variety in it. We do have some lighter tones. We do have some mid or darker tones. It's just an interesting and varied palette. Unfortunately, this palette again doesn't excite me. It just doesn't excite me. And I don't know if it's a matter of the tones on myself or the looks that I've created with it. It's kind of lackluster to my tastes right now. And I feel a little bit bad because this one was given to me by a subscriber as well. And it was so generous. And yet I'm just not using it. So I would rather pass it on to somebody who really wants this palette and can get it for a much lower price than if they bought it brand new from Colourpop's website. Here is an Udenzai palette. This is the Elva 2 Mini Forest. I love Udenzai. It's my favorite brand. This is the Mini Forest palette. Very, very pretty. Very light toned. Very springy. I enjoy the variety of shades in here. These two are mattes, I'm sorry, and the rest are shimmers. But they all work together quite nicely. And I think it's a beautiful palette. I mean, honestly, I don't tend to grab the smaller palettes anymore. At this point, I know myself well enough to know that I want probably at least 9 pans. Generally, I have a few exceptions, but the smaller palettes don't really get used that much. Here is a palette I have not tried. This is the Pure Midnight Masquerade palette. It was, again, a gift from a subscriber, and you can see it's still in its packaging. I'm tempted to open up to this palette because I think that these 4 blush tones are super pretty. However, I don't want to open up the palette if I'm not going to touch the eyeshadows because I feel like I could sell it as brand new and have someone else get all the benefit without me grubbing it up. But, I don't know. These blush shades are really pretty. And now we have the Warrior palette by Juvia's Place. This one's still in its packaging, gifted by a very kind subscriber. I have not decided if I want to keep this one. I think it's listed on my secondhand app, but hey, I don't know. It's a really good neutral palette. The quality is very nice. The mattes are blendable and buildable, and then it's got a variety of shimmers. You see it only has 3 mattes, and then the rest are shimmers. The reason that I'm torn about this one is because I also have, let me just show you right now, the Colourpop Sandstone palette, which looks like this, and again has a wide variety of neutral shades, all the same shades. I did compare these two side by side for my own personal reference, and I can get all of the Warrior shades from the Sandstone palette, basically. Sandstone also offers more shades, and it has a couple more interesting tones, like this one, this one, this one. However, at the end of the day, I almost never reach for neutrals. And so if I do reach for a neutral, for the last year that I've been doing eyeshadow, which honestly is most of my eyeshadow journey, I have dipped into the Limoncello palette because for my own tastes and preferences, that palette offers pretty much any neutral shade I would need. You know, it gives me some warm tones, it gives me some cool tones, it gives me some shimmers, and I'm good to go. So I am considering decluttering both of these simply because when I want neutrals, which is almost never, I have the Limoncello palette, which I don't want to declutter, and these are a little bit less special to me. I'm not sure. On the fence. I've got some longer palettes here. Let's talk about Plain Jane from Adept Cosmetics. This was a subscriber gift, super generous because this is not a cheap palette. This is like a $70 eyeshadow palette. It's all shimmers, all multi-chromes, all beautiful. I like to pair this palette with neutral tones because I feel like you're not competing with other colors. You just get to enjoy the beauty of the multi-chromes and what they offer. It's lovely. I've used it several times now. I tend to use it on like a Sunday if my husband's home and he doesn't really care for eyeshadow, so I might do something a little bit more downplayed as far as color, but then I bring in the sparkle and it's like, okay, this is my compromise. Here we've got the Alice in Wonderland from Sigma. This is a pretty new purchase for me. I actually bought this one new. It was on sale. I got it for a discount, but I really liked this color story. I really like this color story. It was the first time trying Sigma, and overall I was quite impressed. I thought that the mattes performed very, very well. They moved around a lot on the lid, and because I had come off of a week of using Udenzai, which is where the mattes kind of just stay put, my first time using this palette, I was like, whoa, there's brown everywhere. But I quickly realized how the formula worked, and it was fine after that. The shimmers are very nice. They're very smooth and soft. They're more like a sophisticated shimmer, a little bit more traditional satin formula, but they're really nice and I can't complain about them. There's no problem with the quality. This is a really pretty color story. I look forward to playing with this one more too because I just think it's kind of a fun, whimsical color story, very much on the theme with Alice in Wonderland. Here we have the Orange Sorbet palette. We're back in BH Cosmetics. This was part of the Sweet Shop launch, of course. I have two of these. I also own Cherry on Top, but I'm selling that to a friend, so I'm not including it in today's video. Orange Sorbet is one of my favorites from the series itself, but also in general because I do find that I love orange eyeshadow, and this is really good quality. The mattes are lovely, the shimmers are lovely. We've got some variety and depth in tone. I wish it went a little bit deeper. This shade basically never gets used, but when I want orange eyeshadow, this is the one I think of. And I also have the Pistachio palette from the same series. These palettes have been getting easier to find on Poshmark and Mercari. In case you're curious and are looking for them, they are getting easier to find and for lower prices. So if you want one of these palettes from the Sweet Shop series, it's not nearly as hard to find now as it used to be. And this palette I think was so many people's favorites because it went from light to so dark and has just beautiful tones and variety within a simple green color story. It's excellent. I've got some Udenzai on my lap now. Not quite all of them, but again, it's a bit of a smattering. This is the Cat's Breath palette from their Saga of Freya collection. I love this palette. Honestly, I think it is so beautiful. One of the most interesting color stories I own. It's not expected. It's very unusual. We've got Tiffany blue, we've got teal, we've got orange, we've got brown, and then there are 4 different shimmers, which a couple of them have a slightly more chunky formula, a couple of them are a little smoother. They're all interesting. They're all beautiful. Everything works so well. And of course, I mean, I'm not even a cat person, but I like the packaging even. Udenzai packaging is always phenomenal. Moving right into the Hummingbird palette. Packaging win. This was a collaboration between Udenzai and Tina from the Fancy Face. It's part of the original 3 Legendary Diversa palettes. I had the opportunity to buy all 3 of them, but I didn't want to put out the money. I just picked the one that was most interesting to me as far as color story. They also launched at the same time the Giant Wolves palette with Annette and the Red Dragon palette with Judy. They were all beautiful. These are really hard to find for a good price. But I think the Hummingbird, for me, this is kind of a special shades palette because the shimmers are so lovely. They're so unique and they're just, I mean, the quality is amazing. I like that it does have some mattes, so if you want to, you can create an entire look just from this palette. But I tend to think of this one as my special shades palette, along with the Adept palette now, the Plain Jane, because the shimmers are just unique and really lovely. This is the Sol Monet 2. I think this palette is a beautiful variety and assortment of colors. Again, we go light, medium, dark. All of the shimmers are light or mid-toned, which is my preference. I almost never use a really dark shimmer, but we do have 3 deepening shades to make a smokier outer corner, and there's variety in the color story. I think this one's very pretty, very special. We might as well finish up the Udenzai palettes since they're all about the same size, and I'll put them back in the cabinet about the same place. Here is the Norns palette. This was my first Udenzai palette. I adore the packaging. It is so beautiful. Udenzai's packaging is out of this world. Here's the inside of the palette. I was going to declutter this palette. I had it. I used a couple of the shades that I thought were most interesting at the time, the red one, the brown one, and I was not impressed. Also, I used it pretty early in my eyeshadow journey, so my skills are not where they are now. And I tucked the palette to the side and didn't use it again for ages, except to grab like this one and this one. The rest of the shades were ignored, and I shouldn't have done that because recently I can card above for you where I did an entire week of the Norns palette because I was trying to make myself fall back in love with it, and I succeeded. I came up with 4 different looks. The video or the playlist carded above is the entire week of playlist, but Norns is in there. I came up with 4 looks which were all different. They were all beautiful, and it was so much fun to dip into this palette and see what I could create because it has such a varied color story. It's lovely. So yeah, this one was listed for sale and no longer is. Here we have the Hella palette between Udenzai and my favorite YouTuber, Angelica Nyqvist. I think this palette is a home run. The color story and the formula, and oh my goodness, it's absolutely beautiful. I almost didn't buy it because while I think the outer packaging is very creative and well done and completely in line with Udenzai's general aesthetic, I don't particularly care for this exact design with the, half skeleton, and I don't really care for it. However, I understand Hela is the goddess of death. I get it. I understand this was Angie's collab and Angie's design and Angie's call. No problem with that. I ended up buying it because I love the color story. I love Udenzai. I wanted to support Angelica, and I didn't have a moral problem with the packaging. So I was like, it's not my favorite, but I'm not going to draw a line there either. I don't have any moral qualm with the packaging. And now let's talk about the Merry Christmas palette. I think this is my last Udenzai palette. This is the palette that I'm wearing today. Again, this eye look is carded or linked in the description box. This was one of their 2 Christmas releases. I only bought this one because I thought that I would be able to get close enough to the Christmas Eve palette. I only bought this one. I'm so glad I did. I'm currently in the middle of filming a week of playlist with this palette, and it's just amazing. It's so much fun to play with. The color story, it's interesting, it's different. The formula, the packaging, absolute smash hit. Love this palette. Here we have the Festival by Juvia's Place. This was gifted to me by a subscriber, and I think that this palette's really interesting. I think the color story is kind of cool. I like that we've got, orangey red vermilion tones with yellow. All of that's to be expected, but then randomly there's this hot pink and this peach and this bright Caribbean blue. Just random. Like, what are they doing in there? But they make the palette so interesting. I've played with this one several times. I think it's fun. I do like this palette. And we also have the Blueberry Muffin palette back to BH Cosmetics. Great palette, part of the brunch series along with Mimosa. I also owned the Avocado Toast palette a while back from that series, and I decluttered that one because the colors weren't very exciting to me, but this one's great. I love the cool toned blue, silver, brown sort of color scheme. I think it's a tiny bit redundant. A few of these shimmers could have been made more interesting. I really wish they had brought in some more purpley tones or periwinkles, but overall it's a great palette. It is very good quality. Every time I use these browns, or even the blues, honestly, they just blend themselves. They're fabulous. We're actually getting pretty close to the end here, which is good because my little one, I think I'm gonna have to give her a lunch and then try to put her back down for a nap. We have piano lessons today, so these days are always a little bit more busy, and she never wants to cooperate with nap time. All right, so we're going to Ace Beauté right now. This is the Oceanic palette in the old formula. I love this color story. I think this color story is blue and green done right. It's just done so well. There's so much difference in tone, depth, undertones, shades, variety within simply 2 colors. It's done beautifully well. Today, the day that I'm filming, they just released their Aura and Envy palettes. And the Envy palette, I am so tempted by that one because it's basically this pared down a little bit with a little bit more of a yellow or 2 in there. And also it's the better formula because this is the old formula. And the shades are a tiny bit more jewel toned. I am seriously considering grabbing that palette at some point, but it would replace Oceanic, and I would do a video where I compare the 2. But I think this palette, like the color story, is amazing. I'm not really sure why they released the Envy palette because they're so similar. However, if it's a better version and again pared down, better quality, I kind of get that, especially if they plan on discontinuing this one. Anyway, this is a lovely palette and I enjoy playing with it. This is the Still Pretty palette from September Rose Cosmetics. It's the only palette I have from this brand. I wanted this one for quite a while. It has some pinky tones, some purpley tones, some interesting shimmers. It has a lighter white up here. I think the quality is good. I have no problems with it. And it's just a very pretty palette and it's fun to play with. And now we have the Ace Beauté Flare palette, one of my top favorite palettes ever in any category, in any brand, the Flare palette from Ace Beauté. This color story is 100% inspiring to me. I think it's so different and it's got some unexpected twists, kind of like that festival palette where, yeah, you've got the red and oranges, they work together, but then you've got something weird, like a purple, or a blue, or a forest green, or an acid yellow, or a sky blue shimmer. They're just interesting. This gray-based lavendery color over here, where did that come from? But it works. They work together. You can get some really lovely looks from the Flare palette. Okay, now we're in, this is Dirty Martini from Limelight, part of their Happy Hour collection. It's the only one I bought from that series. This is my favorite green palette. I love this one. I love the formula. I love the quality. This shade right here, Green Olive, is my favorite. It's perfect. I do really like that we've got lighter and darker tones. You can go grungy, you can go more neutral, you can go really bright green, you can even go blue. It's lovely. I mean, how can you go wrong with this? I think I just have 5 left, and these are the big ones. These were the ones that were all in one particular section just based on their size. First, we'll start with the Melt Amor y Mariposas palette. This is, I mean, this I think was their holiday release from a year or two ago. Very sturdy, very good quality. It's a very hefty palette. It's not lightweight. It's got a super big mirror inside and a beautiful, beautiful color story. I think this color story is stunning. This shimmer right here, I was comparing this to today's orange shimmer from the Merry Christmas palette, and they're both just beautiful. I love, again, the variety in this palette between the greens and the purples and the reddish sorts of tones. Got some yellow, some grounding shades, some pop sorts of shades. It's fabulous. It's really good quality as well. I'll probably do a week of this palette. I have so many week of ideas. I'll probably do one of this at some point. Touching back on Limelight for a moment, here's the Michaela palette, possibly the second biggest palette in my collection, I think. I think this palette is good. It's good Limelight quality. It's good assortment of colors. I think it's a little bit too purple heavy, but it's really fun. It's got a great pop of yellow, a great minty grass sort of green, and the hot pink. I never use the top rows, really, but if I wanted to, again, a couple of neutrals. Probably don't need those other neutral palettes, right? I don't know. This is a fun palette. It's fun to do a palette bingo with this one because you can get some really unexpected things. I wish it were either pared down or didn't have as many purples. Here we go. Here is the Naughty palette from BH Cosmetics. I think this one is actually the biggest in my collection. 5 times. Oh, you know what? Actually, no. This one is the same size as Michaela because they both have 30 shadows. Okay, so this one was a gift from a subscriber, brand new. And I have not touched this one yet. I've kept it for a couple of reasons, despite the fact that it has pressed glitters, which I don't use. I've kept it because everyone seems to love this palette. They say it's really, really good. When I see swatches of it or other people's looks using it, I go, oh, that's actually kind of surprising in a good way. I like BH quality, and I've heard that this is their very good quality. And it's such a large palette, I could easily do a week of with this palette or palette bingo and really have some fun with it. So I'm keeping it because of what I think it can bring to me and to my collection, but I haven't actually tried it yet. One more Colourpop palette to talk about here is the Play It Jewel palette, which I don't think is available anymore, and that surprises me. I think you can buy it as a bundle with a brush roll, but I don't think you can buy just the palette anymore, and I'm not quite sure why. I think this palette's great. I have customized this palette slightly. If I'm able to, I will link the video where I customize it. YouTube will limit how many cards you can actually put in a video, so I might not be able to, but if I am able to, I'll link this customization video for you. But this is a good palette. This is going to be either, again, a week of or a palette bingo because it's so large and has so much variety. And I think it's really pretty. I don't often dip into it because it's so big. It can feel overwhelming, and that's why I don't often dip into Michaela or even the Naughty palette, which I haven't even touched yet. Just because the bigger the palette gets, the more I feel like, oh my goodness, where do I start? I prefer my palettes to be between like 9 and 16-ish pans, somewhere in that range. And finally, the last palette that we're going to talk about today. I don't think I'm missing any. I might have missed 1 or 2. I don't remember. But this is where we are. Here's the Wilderness palette from Beauty Bay. Classic palette, well loved, kind of a hit wherever you go. Everyone loved this palette, and I understand why. I'm so glad I was able to grab it on one of their restocks. This is a very versatile and very, very pretty palette. It's just got the most beautiful tones in it. They're interesting. They perform super well. None of the shimmers are too dark. Again, these are the 2 darkest shimmers, and they're both on the darker side of mid-tone, but they're not very dark, so I still use and enjoy using them. I love the assortment of colors in here. I love that we've got a bunch of cool toned, a bunch of warm toned. You can mix and match and have a lot of different fun with them, get a lot of different looks. We've got some reds as well, and these are good quality reds, which is sort of a difficult shade to formulate, I think. It's just a fabulous palette. I'm very happy I have this one. Okay, that I believe is everything. I think that's everything. I was a little scared to do this video because I didn't want it to take ages, and now my little one needs me, so I'm gonna let you guys go. Thank you so much for being with me. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will be having a video in the new year, probably talking about a couple of new things that came into my collection, because I know that I've got 1 or 2 eyeshadow palettes that are going to be under the Christmas tree. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe before you go. If you want to see more, remember to check out all the information in the description box, from what I'm wearing to my eyeshadow look today to palettes that you can probably buy. If I can find them online from today's list, I will link them in the description box or the pinned comment if I run out of space. Whew. There we go. That's everything. I'm going to let you guys go. Until I see you again, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.